Hello, Honors 100. I hope everyone had a great weekend. I'm going to jump right into it today. Start off with some reminders. So, first of all, the initial artifact analysis assignment is due/was due, depending on when you're watching this and when the upload goes through, 11 a.m. today, Monday. So, when last I checked, I had most of them in. I think I was only missing 3 or 4 of them. So, it looks like we're in good shape overall. But in case you are one of the folks who haven't turned it in yet, and this slipped your mind, or there was a misunderstanding about the due date, just to make sure we're clear, 11 a.m. on today, Monday, September 14th, was the expectation for that assignment. So I look forward to going through those. It'll probably take me a little bit longer to grade these than it did for the original 5-paragraph essay assessment assignment, but not a ton longer. I'm still hopeful that within a week or so I should have those back to everyone. And again, it'll be on a rolling basis. So some of you will probably have your scores and feedback as soon as tomorrow. And for some of you, it might be into the weekend or early later than that. But rest assured, I will get to all of them. And again, as a reminder, I do leave comments on all of them. So don't look at just your score. Make sure you are reading the comments, especially because I will tend to gear a lot of these comments towards what's coming next. A part of it is justifying your grade and giving some general feedback about your writing. A part of the feedback I give for assignments like this, though, is what's coming up next, because a lot of the assignments in this class kind of build on each other. And so it's important to consider that before you go on to the next one. And that's often stuff I'll hold you responsible for, especially for more mechanical type errors like formatting mistakes, that sort of thing. I'll probably correct you but not actually take off credit this time around. But if I see the same mistake again after I've corrected you, that's where you might lose a little bit of credit for that sort of thing. Also wanted to offer a reminder about reading response journals. I'd say about 2/3 of the class is doing great in this aspect of the class, have been turning them in regularly, are keeping up right along with it and doing a great job with those journal response entries. I'd say there's another small portion of the class that turn in at least one of the entries, so I know that you have at least a general idea of what you're doing. But I would love to see you keep up on that a little bit more. Again, it's ultimately up to you. You can turn them in later on in the semester as a big group, or just when you have time. But I do feel like it's a much more manageable task if you're just kind of keeping up on it and submitting them on a regular basis. But there are also a small portion of you, so I apologize, this is definitely the smallest proportion, but who I still haven't seen any journal responses from yet. And just to make sure we're crystal clear on this expectation, the journal responses are different from the online discussion. I know early on there was some confusion about that, which is totally understandable, but at this point, I'm hopeful that there's no more confusion about it. The online discussions are your engagement and participation part of the class. Reading response journals are a totally separate 10-point part of the class. It is a significant portion of your grade, so I hope the folks are able to tend to that. I sent a reminder on Friday to anyone who I haven't seen any journal entries from yet, just to make sure we're on the same page. And a few of you started to catch up and did submit some over the weekend, so I appreciate that. But if you're one of the folks who still hasn't gotten any journal responses in yet, please make sure you are doing that. Please touch base with me if you're not sure what I'm talking about or you're confused about the difference between them and class discussion. I'm more than happy to hash that out with you, but if you have questions, I need to know what the questions are in order to be able to address them effectively. But thank you for the overwhelming majority of you who are tending to that responsibility well. Other reminder I wanted to make mention of was the Writing Center. So as a reminder, the Honors College Writing Center is a great resource that they'll review papers with you, mostly with an eye towards content. They'll talk about some elements of formatting and mechanics, all that to a minor extent, but their emphasis is more on more content-oriented things, which, to be fair, is much more what I'm concerned about as well, right? You're very rarely going to do poorly on assignment based on mechanical sort of stuff. You might lose a point or two here or there, but the content is first and foremost what matters the most in this class. And I think you'll find it in most honors college classes, and in fact throughout most of your college career. I mean, it depends a little bit on your major and your professor in an individual instance, but I would say the overwhelming majority of us care a fair bit more about the content than the more mechanical pieces of things. So in any event, at this point I haven't received any confirmations of anyone using the Writing Center yet, and that's fine. The first couple assignments aren't, at least in my mind, the most challenging ones. If you wanted to wait until these next next few assignments, that makes a fair bit of sense to me. But at the same time, I wouldn't wait until necessarily our first big paper, the research argument essay. I shouldn't say first big paper, but I think you know what I mean. The heaviest, most weighted assignment of the semester, and I wouldn't wait until the very end, just because you're competing for time with other students in the honors college. Most honors 100 classes have a requirement like this, and so if you do wait towards the end, you might not be able to get an appointment anymore, and then you will automatically lose that credit from the class. It's a really crummy way to lose 5 points in the class when something you could have done from the very first week of class. So just planting that seed as a reminder that it's there. Again, I encourage you, take advantage of the Writing Center early, at least to meet this commitment for the class. All you need to do is, make an appointment, attend the appointment. I'll get a confirmation that you did it. You'll get 5 points added to your grade on Canvas, and we're kind of done with that. And if you have a really good experience with it, then you know that, and you can use them again and again throughout this semester and beyond in your college career. And if you have a crummy experience where you don't find it very helpful, then you've checked that box. It's no longer hanging over your head. You're done with that aspect of what you need to do for this semester. So again, just bear in mind, make those Writing Center appointments soon. I'll leave a link to that in the broader discussion here as well, just as a reminder of how to access that. Okay, so there's two other pieces of kind of the meat of today's class. I'm going to talk over the Chuck Klosterman reading that we had assigned for today, and then I'm also going to introduce our next assignment, which is the annotated bibliography assignment. You still have a good amount of time before that's actually due. Actually, I'm going to pull up the assignment here just to refresh my own memory and make sure I'm not citing the wrong time when this is due. Oh shoot, I thought I had it open, so apologies. I'm taking an extra moment here. Let's see, the annotated bibliography prompt. Here we go. Okay, so for this assignment, which again, I'm going to talk about in the tail end of this video, it's Monday, September 28th. So you do have 2 solid weeks to do this, and I think it's very reasonable to get it done within that period of time. The reason I'm introducing it today is I find some students really benefit from having a lot of lead time and be able to take these sort of things incrementally, start working on it now and just gradually work up so that's not a stressful thing. I know some folks are inevitably going to wait until the last few days before it's due, and while I don't necessarily recommend or advocate for that, I recognize that that's how some people work, but regardless, I think it's useful just to have it on your radar that this is coming up at minimum, so this isn't blindsiding you. So yeah, I know it can feel stressful. You just turned in an assignment for today, and I'm already talking about the next significant assignment for the class. I get that can feel like some pressure, but rest assured, again, my intention here is just to make sure that nothing is blindsiding you, and you can plan your work the way that works best for you. And feel free to touch base with me if you want to talk that over a little bit more and get any piece of advice for how I might recommend that you approach that as we go. So, but before, again, we get into that assignment, I want to talk about the Chuck Klosterman piece here. So it's called This is Emo. I hope folks had some fun with this reading. I consider, again, a lot of the PDFs that I'm giving you are texts that I have personally kind of chosen just because I think either they speak to the class in an interesting way, or I think they're just sort of fun to read, right? That they're not necessarily traditional academic texts the way most of the ones in the textbook are, but ones that you can kind of engage with and maybe relate to in some ways, and that we can still have some meaningful discourse about, and we can still apply some ideas around rhetoric and argumentation that we're talking about in this class to these slightly less formal pieces. But with this one, it is a little dated. So I realized I should address a couple of the people who Klosterman cites here. So he references John Cusack, right? And so if anyone's seen the meme that goes around with the guy who has like the big old school boombox over his head, that's John Cusack. He's kind of iconically played some romantic leads in a number of movies, especially late 80s into early 90s. So if you're not familiar with him, that's the touchstone. I imagine most of you could probably figure that out from the context, but nonetheless, that is. And then Woody Allen. Woody Allen was a pretty respected director, writer, and actor. Again, mostly I would kind of focus his career in the 80s. I think he's got started with kind of being better regarded or receiving some acclaim in the 1970s, kind of in his prime in the 80s and into the 90s to some degree. He has more recently become kind of a controversial figure. I'm not going to go into all of the dirty laundry here. You can Google it if you are so inclined. But the short short version, I'm probably oversimplifying because I'm not an expert on this matter by any means, but was that he and his wife adopted a child, and then he ended up having a romantic relationship with that woman. I think they actually even ended up getting married. It's problematic. I actually would go so far as to call it kind of creepy. Again, I don't know enough of the specifics of the story to have a firm opinion or to tell you what to think about it. I wouldn't try to do that anyway, but nonetheless, I wanted to acknowledge that, mostly in case anyone has that background and is bringing that sort of baggage into the reading. When this was published, some of that was starting to come out, but it wasn't really common knowledge at that point. I don't think we should necessarily hold that against Klosterman at this point. We can certainly hold some other things against Klosterman, but I think his treatment of Woody Allen and not kind of addressing the problematic pieces of his personal reputation, a big part of that is he just didn't have that reputation yet when this was published. So just putting that out there if you're interested. Again, there's plenty on the internet that you can Google out about that and learn more if you're so inclined. But so with this piece, the big question I want to raise, I'm only going to raise a few questions for this one and leave it to the discussion thread for the rest of it, but what is the central argument Klosterman is getting at here? Because I think, especially on a more surface level, we can definitely say there's an argument here about relationships and the way that people approach them, especially in more contemporary times, right? Because I think he's framing that this was published in the aughts, in the early 2000s. But I think that it's from a closer period of time to now than if he published it, for example, 10, 20, 30 years earlier than that. Because he's speaking from a frame of reference where, the internet is what it is, where pop culture is what it is. It's obviously evolved since the time this was published, but nonetheless, most ways saying, I think we can relate to. We may not get every pop culture reference he's dropping here, but we can follow the logic, I think, of what he's saying. I know he references Friends a few times here, and in a way that I would have been afraid that those references would be too dated. I feel like Friends had kind of a resurgence in the last few years, and so I've been surprised that most of my students actually do have some frame of reference with that show. But regardless, what he's saying about the way that we look at, songs by Coldplay, about, actors like John Cusack in movies, about relationships like Ross and Rachel on Friends, what that does to real life relationships. And by extension, I guess the bigger question, how that affects our larger life experience, right? How we sort of look at the pop culture we admire, the stories we kind of obsess over, these fictions that have kind of become part of the fabric of our kind of common culture, how that affects the way that we see ourselves, or expectations we hold for ourselves, or our relationships with other people. So I think that there's a lot there for that question, and I hope that folks with the text can kind of see where that comes in. This isn't meant to be a trick question. I think it's pretty much on the page. I think we can deduce this pretty clearly. And then more broadly, what Klosterman is sort of saying about figures like John Cusack, like Woody Allen, to parse it a little bit, Klosterman kind of goes so far to suggest that he has benefited from Woody Allen's popularity because he too is kind of a superficially nerdy-looking guy who can kind of make bank on that. Essentially, he can attract people because they can relate to him because he looks like that kind of person, right? Again, before all the stigma is attached to Woody Allen, and I think it's kind of what he's saying here about these men, and and when he talks about John Cusack as being someone who's he's sort of competing with, and he's not actually physically there, right? And how complicated that is, because on one hand, as Klosterman acknowledges in the very opening pages here, that's sort of a benefit to him, that like, well, how can this guy even compete with me when he's not even in my love interest's life? But on the flip side, because he's not actually there, he can't mess anything up, right? He doesn't have to be a real person for people who have these celebrity crushes or whatnot. So I'm going to leave the piece there. I think that those questions in and of themselves leave a lot for us to unpack. So I'm really interested in hearing just kind of our thoughts along those lines and seeing what we can come up with. So with that, I want to dedicate the rest of this time to the annotated bibliography assignment. I'm going to preface this by saying while I don't think the assignment itself is that overly complicated, it is one that often provokes a relatively large number of questions from students. So I'm going to really try to break this down here, but I encourage you to make sure you're watching and listening to this part of the video. I hope you're watching and listening to the whole thing and doing that for all of our classes, but especially this part. Often when I'm leading this in class, I tend to get one of the highest volume of questions related to this assignment, just because there are so many kind of particular elements to it. So make sure I'm going to leave the prompts linked in our discussion thread here so you can follow along with me. But please make sure you're paying attention to this part, reading over the prompt for yourself. Once you kind of wrap your head around what this assignment is, I don't think it's, again, that challenging. It's definitely a fair amount of work, but in terms of figuring out what to do, I think that most students can wrap their heads around it once they take some time to kind of just figure it out. But because this one could be a little complicated, I'm actually just going to literally read the assignment prompts. Again, I encourage you to follow along, and I'll kind of give some insertions here, some clarifications or points of discussion as we go. So I'm going to start with the actual assignment prompt. So it says, what is this assignment? A bibliography is a compiled list of sources, such as journal articles, books, essays, etc., pertaining to a particular topic and arranged in alphabetical order. So I think you've all seen a bibliography. It looks like a works cited. That's pretty commonplace to have done multiple times throughout your high school experience. An annotation is an explanatory note, in this case one that both analyzes and evaluates a source. So put them together and you have a list of secondary sources, texts that will be used to extend and deepen your analytical argument with concise overviews of each. More than a summary, your annotations will demonstrate your critical reading of the text and articulate its relevance to your project. This stage of the project is designed to advance your information literacy, the ability to recognize when you need information, identify the kinds of information you need, and then locate, evaluate, and utilize that information accordingly. So just to say that a little more plainly, what you're doing for this assignment is you're constructing a bibliography. It's going to look like a works cited, just your MLA formatted, citation of a source, and then you're giving me a paragraph discussing that source. And I'm going to get into what that paragraph consists of, but basically the overarching idea is it's explaining and kind of talking about that source and proving you actually did the reading, right? Okay, going on to the second paragraph here, and this is often where people tend to get confused. Specifically, your task is to find a total of 10 credible research sources representing at least one source from each of these 4 categories: book, chapter, website, magazine article, newspaper article. Each of these sources should relate to your artifact in some way. So to pause there, the 4 categories: book, chapter, website, magazine article, newspaper article. Those are 4 different kinds of sources. You need to have at least one of each of those. And then so that'll cover 4 sources, right? If you have one of each of those. For the remaining 6, you can double back to any given one of these. So you can have 3 book chapters, 3 websites, 2 magazine articles, 2 newspaper articles, or just 1 book chapter, one magazine article, 1 newspaper article, and 7 websites. Any permutation, any combination of those, so that you have each of the categories covered at least once and a total of 10 sources. That's what we're looking for here. I hope that's clear. That's the part that tends to be the most confusing. So if you already are like yeah, I get it, that's not that complicated, awesome. You're ahead of the game. You've got it. The other part that I think tends to confuse people is this idea that be related to your artifact. So this is the artifact you did your initial artifact analysis on. A very small handful of students might want to change, because I didn't discuss very much that these were going to be connected assignments. So if you sort of feel like you don't want to use your artifact anymore, we can have that discussion. In general, I find it's best just to stick with what you started with, though, unless you did really poorly on that assignment and really just kind of hate your artifact at this point. I find 99 out of 100 students, it's best that they stay with the artifact they started with. It doesn't need to be research about your artifact. So just go on to this next part here. In many cases, if not most cases, you will not find a great deal of research that applies directly to your artifact, but you should be able to find research that speaks to the major themes raised in your artifact, the culture and context it was created within, the artist who made it, etc. So I use the example here of Logic's 1-800-273-8255. I know that was a pretty popular song and music video a few years back, and I actually had a number of students use it for this assignment. This is what prompted me to actually just put it in the prompt and unpack this a little bit. So you could investigate the song and the music video themselves. There probably is some research about those, but you're probably going to have a hard time finding 10 separate sources that say meaningfully different things about them in that way. So other things you could research that are related to this artifact, not necessarily about this artifact. Logic as an artist, teen suicide rates, suicide prevention efforts, depictions of self-harm in popular media, LGBT relationships, popular music in the 2010s, et cetera, et cetera. So Again, anything this video basically makes you think of, in any way represents, raises questions about, is fair game for you to look at here. And the big idea, I'm going to break from just reading verbatim from the prompt here because I think it's a little redundant at this point. But the thing here is you don't need to settle on like, okay, I'm going to write a paper about representations of suicide in pop media, and I'm going to use logic as kind of the centerpiece for that. That could be what someone with that artifact would do, but it's not where they necessarily have to go. But rather, at this point, the idea is research a bunch of stuff related to your artifact in some way. If you find yourself drawn in one direction, you can lean fully into that direction. Just devote all of your research, or at least a significant portion of your 10 sources to that. But if you're just not sure, feel free to just go in all different directions. Research 10 different things that are in some way related to your artifact. That is totally fair game. And the idea is, coming out of this process, you might find, okay, here's the one that was the easiest to research. Here's the one that I'm most personally interested in. And part of the spirit of this series of assignments is it's trying to set it up such that you start with an artifact you actually like. So I'm not just assigning you a chapter from the book that you may or may not jive with, but rather you get to pick the artifact that you're sort of interested in. And now you get to research widely about different things related to it, so you can figure out what you're most interested in or what you like the most that's related to that artifact in some way. So okay, so I'm going to scroll here. So there's a reference to this thing in the last paragraph of the What Is assignment called the rhetorical précis or template. I'm going to get to that in just a second here. So put a thumb in that. But yeah, so, and actually I'm going to just kind of scroll through here for the rest of this. It just kind of goes through some of the particulars of the assignment that I don't feel need quite as much unpacking. But, it has the due date here and the point total, 15 points. The next thing I'm going to go to here is the annotated sentence sequence. That second PDF, I think the actual file name is annotated bibliography sentence sequence or something along those lines. This breaks down what I'm looking for in those paragraphs where you discuss your source. I want 5 sentences for each of the sources, and they break down pretty cleanly, I think. So the first sentence, you're basically giving me, who the author is, what their credentials are, what the name of the work is, and just in general what this thing is about. And this could be an article, this could be a report, this could be a creative work that you found, this could be a YouTube video that can count as one of your website sources, anything along those lines. Sentence 2, explain how the author supports their central argument. Now this varies. In many cases, you might be able to tell the author is actually making an argument or they have a main point they're getting at. In some cases, it might be more informational the way they presented it, in which case you can skew this a little bit. If it's not clear they actually have an argument, you basically just say, how are they supporting the article itself or the speech they're giving or whatever the source actually is. Sentence 3, what seems to be their purpose, right? Everything that's been published ever has had a purpose of some kind or another, and it's up to your interpretation what that purpose seems to be based on what you're reading or what you're watching or what you're consuming there. Describe the intended audience and relationship the author establishes with the audience. There's only one wrong answer in regards to the intended audience. Don't say it's everybody. Don't say this is meant for a general audience of anyone. The reason I say that is that's literally never happened. No one has ever written anything they expected every single person to read. And you might say, well, no, some stuff is written for a really general audience. If something is written, is it meant for someone who is not able to read? Right? If something is published on the internet, is it made for people who do not have access to the internet? These might be really broad categories still, right? But you can still narrow in somewhat on who this might be targeted towards, if only in terms of availability. But often in terms of the kind of language they're using, the political view they might put forth, any of that could help further refine who that audience is. And then sentence 5, everyone should be able to do this really easily, but explain how it's relevant to your artifact. If you can't explain why this is relevant to your artifact, then it's not a good source. You shouldn't have picked the source in the first place, right? The whole point is that it be a source that's related to your artifact. So you have to be able to do that. 5 sentences, I've given you examples of what every single one of those sentences could look like. I've made up a fictitious article that I would have published about why essays are good, just to kind of help understand what I'm looking for in each of those sentences. So it's 10 sources, 10 MLA formatted citations, 10 paragraphs, one paragraph for each source that breaks it down in those 5 sentences. It's substantial, right? That is a meaty assignment. I don't give a page count for this one because it can vary so widely. I've had students successfully complete the assignment in about 5 pages, including, the citation, then the paragraph, citation, then the paragraph. So it's not just a big block essay. I've had students who take closer to 10 pages for this assignment. If you're going much over 10 pages, you're probably doing a good bit more work than I intend for you to do. I'm not going to penalize you for it, but just to check your expectations. Again, if you're making it that long, you're probably doing more work than you need to get a really good score on this assignment. So that's on you at that point. Okay, those are the big elements, and then I have a grade guide for this one also. I include that there largely, again, as just kind of a checklist. There's not really much new there, right? So if you read the prompt carefully and you read through the annotation sentence sequence template carefully, there's nothing really new in the grade guide, but it just put it in a different format. So if you're having a hard time wrapping your head around it, that might help you just kind of, again, process the information a little bit more cleanly there. So I hope all of that's, fairly clear. Yeah, I know this can be a big assignment. Take some time, read through these documents yourself. Again, you might want to rewatch this part of the video. That's one of the benefits of having the video lectures here, as opposed to just me talking through this live, is that you can rewatch these things if you do have big questions. But then also leave questions in the discussion thread, because it's not uncommon to have questions about this assignment. So that's fine to introduce questions here. But again, take some time to process all of that and see what we come up with. And again, I think that this assignment, a lot of students are a little bit intimidated by it first, but once you get into the thick of actually collecting sources, you find that it's more reasonable than it seems at first blush. I'm going to have some resources from the library that I'll be sharing with you. I'm working with a librarian to compile those for us for our virtual format. Tentatively, he's supposed to have those to me later this week, so I'm hopeful for Wednesday's class I'll be able to share them with you. If not for Wednesday's class, then the following Monday. But otherwise, feel free to use relatively informal sources as well, right? Google is a great tool for this purpose, but the UNLV library website is also a good source. Again, feel free to start exploring that yourself, but rest assured we are going to have some materials from the library directly that will help us further with that whole process. All right, thank you all so much for watching. Sorry this one ran a little bit long, but I hope that the assignment explanation is clear, and I hope that the classroom piece leads to some interesting discussion in our discussion thread. But thanks everyone, and I will catch you next time.